talking about our safe staffing ratio. The number of patients to nurses is increasing while people are dying and nurses are scared. This may not affect you today, but it could affect you or a loved one tomorrow. I have been a nurse for a short year and a half, but in that short time I have seen the ratios of workload increase and unfortunately the level of care decrease. Having a safe ratio of patients to nurses is crucial to the patient's well-being. I'm going to explain why it is necessary to demand a safe staff ratio across the country. The first main point discusses our current staffing ratio that's already in place. There isn't a federal law mandating the current staffing ratio. California was the first state and remains the only state to place into effect a safe patient ratio law. There are 7 states that require a staffing committee and a few others that have implemented other procedures to try and assist with the safe staffing ratio in their states. Unfortunately, the staffing ratio is controlled by the budget instead of considering the safety of the patient and the nurse. Without any law overseeing our staffing ratio, a nurse can be handed the care of more patients than that nurse can actually safely care for, which is impacting the well-being of the patient, as well as the well-being of the nurse. Second main point, discuss what's at risk. Patient's well-being becomes put at risk when the nurse is overloaded. A patient becomes at higher risk for infections due to the little time the nurse has available to spend with the patient, and something can be easily overlooked. A patient also becomes a higher risk for falls. The patient is taught to use their call bell to get up for assistance, but if staff is overloaded with patients, they're not able to answer as well as quickly to assist them. Along with both of these risks, the patient becomes at a higher risk for death. If something gets overlooked because the nurse is trying to see and care for all of their patients, and an infection develops that might get overlooked as well, this puts the patient at risk for possible sepsis, which can lead to death. In the same sense, a patient can seriously injure themselves from a fall that could lead to death also. Overall, something can occur so quickly that had the nurse not been overworked and overloaded with patients, might have been able to catch it or might have been able to respond more quickly to save a patient's life. The nurse's well-being is at risk as well. With an increased number of patients comes an increased number of meds to pass within an allotted time frame, which can lead to medication errors. It also affects the nurse's health. The long hours and being overworked increases the nurse's likelihood of developing medical conditions, hindering their performance even further and sometimes pulling them out of the nursing field completely. Nurses become overworked, burnt out, and scared to lose their license or their patients. Due to unsafe patient to staff ratio, 1 out of 3 nurses are leaving the nursing field completely, which in return creates a vicious cycle. Nurses are leaving the field faster than it takes to obtain their degree. Within 12 months, 1 out of 5 nurses leave the field. Within 2 years, 1 out of 3 nurses leave the field. Nurses feel that they are working under unsafe and stressful conditions, causing them to feel overworked and burnt out early on in their career. Studies have found that the long, overworked hours are affecting the nurses' overall health, physically and mentally. Long shifts and overtime have been linked to cardiovascular disease and hypertension. Nurses have also reported depression and fatigue. Along with these effects, nurses are also experiencing insomnia, headaches, weight gain, irritability, and many more. The heavy workload, long hours, and inadequate staffing are affecting the patient's overall outcome of healing, readmission, and sometimes accidental death. Now, hopefully, you can see that this topic is something that should be a concern to all, not just the nursing and medical staff. I spoke about the current staffing ratio, the risk associated with this, along with why nurses are leaving the field due to this unsafe staffing ratio. As a nurse and have already experienced the unsafe staffing ratio, I think that it is important to provide others with information as well on why it is so important that this issue be pushed. This is not just affecting our nurses, it is affecting each and every one of us and our loved ones.
Okay.